And I want to make sure that you all know that this is being recorded. So folks that couldn't join us have the availability of seeing it, and we can look back at all the fun books that we've read and all the fun authors that we've had the opportunity to chat with. So as you're settling in, let us know where you're joining us from and maybe what bird you were particularly thrilled to see today. And then I'm just going to get started with a quick introduction now that I think people are situated, ready to talk cuckoos. Um, Again, welcome to the Environment for the Americas Bird Book Club. The Environment for the Americas is a nonprofit organization and based in Colorado is the headquarters. And our mission is to connect people to birds and nature and inspire, in particular, the next generation of conservationists by connecting people with nature and helping them understand what it means to protect birds and their habitats. So we do this in a variety of ways. We do a lot of attendance at conferences and bird conservation meetings. We collect data, so that's at the global level as well as a regional level and local levels. We work with conservation organizations and bird clubs and groups of people who do that kind of data collection. We also create educational materials and do a lot of community outreach. We attend conferences where we share that information and do a lot of outreach. We also have interns that we hire. So we coordinate with federal agencies and other nonprofit organizations to hire young people to get them interested in potential careers of bird education and thinking how can they learn more about birds and their habitats and working with people. So a lot of different things that we do to really engage people. One of the signature things that we do that I'm sure all of you are aware of, but I'm going to mention it anyway, we coordinate World Migratory Bird Day. So we can coordinate it at the global level with the Convention on Migratory Species and with the Agreement on the Conservation of African Eurasian Migratory Water Birds. So large organizations getting together, working together to make sure that we really think about migratory birds who have no boundaries and no borders in the typical way that we think of them. And how do we really think about protecting them and getting people excited about the birds? And so when you visit our website, you'll see a map that shows you the different Migratory Bird Day celebrations that are happening around the world, and in particular in North and Central and South America. So we encourage you to look for places where you could maybe even volunteer your time or just spend a day or learn more about birds. There are a lot of ways that you can support us. You can actually become a friend of ours. You can support organizations that we work with, and you can go shopping. And so we have a shop.environmentamericas.org site where you can buy shade-grown coffee. You can buy things to help protect birds from smashing into your windows. You can purchase things that can help you with ideas to keep your cats indoors, all of the things that are really helpful in protecting birds. So in addition to all of those very practical things that you can find on our website, you can find fun things like stickers and glasses and shade-grown coffee and tote bags and everything that you can think of that's kind of bird related. So lots of opportunity for you to have some fun on our website. So we'd love for you, as I mentioned, to become a friend. Share this information with your friends. Stay in touch with us. Follow us on our various social media sites. All of that information is on our website. And just really be a part of the fabulous world of birds. So we love that you've joined the Bird Book Club tonight. And we hope that and I see a lot of familiar faces and a lot of familiar names. So I know many of you have joined us in the past. Our next Bird Book Club is Thursday, April 24, and it is with Tim Beatley, and he is going to talk about the bird-friendly city. So many people are doing things within their own communities to help birds and their conservation, and making birds friendly, or cities friendly to birds, is one way that people can, can really help. And it just gets other people excited about birds. So we are very excited tonight to have Cynthia Chris with us. And again, my name is Alicia King, and I am a volunteer for Environment for the Americas. Um, my day job is with the Forest Service, and I work at the Forest Products Laboratory in Madison, Wisconsin, where we do a lot of research on trees and the things that we can enjoy from trees. But tonight, I'm excited to have Cynthia with us, and she is going to talk. I'm sorry, Cynthia, I can't help this. Cuckoo. The first thing that goes through my brain is cuckoo. So we're going to talk, but I want to just give you just a teensy bit about her, and this is in on the back of her book. But she's a professor in the Department of Media Culture at the College of Staten Island, at the City University of New York. And so she's written several books, and I'm not going to tell you about one of the books that she's going to talk to us about tonight, in addition to cuckoos, because I'm going to let her do that. So I'm gonna turn the floor over to Cynthia. So Cynthia, welcome to the Environment for the Americas Bird Book Club. So excited to have you here, and tell us a little bit more about you and this whole, how do you do this? How do you write these fun books? Tell us everything.
Well, thank you, Alicia. That's really what I want to talk about, is how I came to write this book, and also have come to write other things about animals and how we represent them in culture, the roles that they play as sort of avatars for our ideas about ourselves, and where we get ideas about you know social organization from them, how we try to bounce back and forth with what we observe about animals, some of it accurate, some of it not so much, right? But the way that we play so much with animals in cultural work is really what I want to talk about. And I guess that, I can say that's my story, right? Really, which is that, as a kid, I always really was fascinated by animals, and I'll talk about this a little bit more. Um, I was really, really fascinated by different kinds of animals, and liked reading about animals and learning about animals. And I somehow just couldn't shake this. I went to art school, and animals kept appearing in the visual artwork that I was making, and I didn't stay a visual artist really, but I over the long haul. But I began to study art history and media history and film history, and I just kept going back to animals and all of these kinds of things. So that's what you're going to see here. That's the trajectory that you're going to see, is how, like, in my writing, in my study of the visual world, visual culture, that these animals just keep recurring. But I want to thank you, Alicia, for hosting my visit. I want to thank Miguel for supporting this event, and really to everybody at Environment for the Americas. This is a really cool series if you like birds or animals in general, or Zoom talks, really. Really visit their website, and if you're not a regular, right, and check out what else they do, because I've been able to attend some of their other events, and it's great organization, great series. But why cuckoo, right? Without a doubt, the most frequent question that I've been asked about this book is, why cuckoo? Of all the fish in the sea and all the birds in the sky, why on earth cuckoo? Why did you write about cuckoos? And I think it's a fair question, and I want to be upfront about this. I am not an ornithologist, right? I'm not even like a very expert birder. And I suspect that many of you here are. I call myself a casual bird watcher who aspires to spend a lot more time watching birds. And fortunately, here in Jersey City, where I live, we have lots of opportunities to do that at certain locations in the Feminist Bird Club of Jersey City and the and Jersey City Birds. These folks are just great at having walks and talks and events to get people out there. And I try to join whenever I can. So if anybody from those organizations is here, thank you and a shout out. But like I said, I'm fascinated, right? I marvel at the occasional surprise visitor to my urban New Jersey garden. We've had a woodcock, we've northern flickers, or an occasional yellow-bellied sapsucker. But I can lose time just as well watching the ubiquitous sparrows or my neighbor's backyard chickens. Animals of all kinds have always intrigued me. Skip a few years, right? Maybe a few dozen. And when I went to graduate school and went on to become a professor and a scholar in media studies and visual culture, even though most of my research and writing has been about film and television, I've always tried to keep the animals close. So let me bring up some pictures here. I'll share my screen. Okay, here we go. Okay. Okay, I might actually have to do it like this rather than full screen, but I hope that you all have really good views. I hope that works. Okay,
Yes.
you can
So
see.
yes, Cynthia. So we are seeing your slides to the left, as you're going through them. But is this easier for you to
Yeah, it's a lot easier. I
maneuver
think
through?
that
Okay.
that's fine. Yeah,
All
thank
right.
you.
All right. Thanks.
My first book was Watching Wildlife, which you can see there. And it's a history of nature films. I'd grown up with Disney reruns, with Marlon Perkins, and with early David Attenborough. But years later, when I revisited the genre to study it as a kind of product of cinema and television, I was really fascinated at how, even though um, the genre purports to be natural history, so often animals were really vehicles for stories. We were featured as symbols, stand-ins for ourselves, maps on which we could project our fantasies and fears, rather than autonomous beings with lives and histories of their own. Now, around the time that Watching Wildlife was published, I became aware of a new series published by Reaction Books of London. These are short, richly illustrated volumes, each of which focuses on the natural and cultural history of an animal, and I began to harbor a not-so-secret desire to write one of these books. Um, while the series includes animals of all kinds, I think that Cuckoo is the 105th book in the series. I'm just showing off the birds here because of who our audience is, right? Crow up here was one of the first 4 published, and among the most recent, including Cuckoo, are, let's see, Robin and Nightingale are very new as well. And if you read the book, you'll see Nightingale and Cuckoo often appear together in musical compositions. So it's appropriate that they came out around the same time. I really encourage you to check out the series. They're small books. I can hold up one of them, and here's Cuckoo. And they each have about 100 illustrations, and they're distributed really worldwide, and so they're easy to get. And I think fun, quick reads. Great dives into the animal in folklore, myth, art, music, literature, and everything else, right? But my first contribution to the series wasn't a bird at all. So we're gonna divert from the birds here for a few minutes. Bear with me. My first subject for reaction was one that I stumbled on literally quite by accident. And so let me share with you a few passages from the opening chapter of Crab. On the southwest corner of Costa Rica, Osa Peninsula juts into the Pacific Ocean. Corcovado National Park, Costa Rica's largest, occupies much of the peninsula. It is also a biodiversity hotspot with a dazzling array of animal species soaring through the air, occupying the trees, and ambling or crawling or slithering through the dense rainforest. Animals also scurry underfoot, which is where I met the Ecuadorian or Pacific hermit crab. While taking a walk on the beach, I suddenly saw these small creatures, some not much larger than a pencil eraser. They moved with great purpose until I came within a couple of footsteps, and then they suddenly froze in place. When I knelt to take a closer look at these little animals, they withdrew into their scavenged shells. If I stood stock still, they would emerge and continue their trek across the beach. There weren't just a few of them, there were thousands, each and every one headed from the shoreline to the top of the beach at the rainforest edge. The sun was thinking about setting, and the hermit crabs were seeking shelter for the night under a park ranger's station. I didn't think much about the hermit crabs during the rest of my week in the area. I went bird watching at dawn, catching glimpses of iconic toucans, half a dozen different hummingbirds, 3 types of monkeys, anteaters, coati, and a sleepy sloth nested high in a tree. It was really an amazing trip. But when I returned home, 2 questions kept coming back to me. First, although there were countless hermits on the beach, I never saw empty seashells. Where were these animals finding new shells as they outgrow the old? My second nagging question, if we can peek a little bit intimately into one of these folks here. This is a specimen out of the shell, preserved specimen. My second nagging question was another indication of how little I knew about these creatures. Don't crabs have hard shells which they molt periodically? In other words, is the hermit crab a crab? It didn't take a lot of fishing around to find answers to those 2 questions, which only seemed to nurture my growing curiosity about crustaceans. But in truth, there was a third question. Would crab be the animal that I could contribute to Reaction's series? Happily, the answer to that question was yes, and I loved every minute of getting to know these guys, from the hermits to the true crabs. And my favorite crab that isn't a crab at all, the Atlantic horseshoe crab, right? And to their counterparts, drawn only in our imaginations. A lot of you probably know Sebastian, and maybe a few lucky ones among you have seen this old Roger Corman film. But of course, we're not here to talk about crabs. The cuckoo's absence from the growing animal series was glaring, and I was very happy, once again, that it fell to me to right that wrong. And here's where I have another confession to make. The common cuckoo at the outset of this project was a complete stranger to me. All the more reason, I thought, to accept the assignment and learn about a bird only known to me as an ominous cipher in a nursery rhyme woven into the novel One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest by Ken Kesey, and its, of course, many stage play and movie and TV adaptations, right? I also knew the cuckoo as an improbably dressed chocoholic selling breakfast cereal, and I knew of it as an hourly surprise emerging from twee wall clocks. This is a pretty ornate cuckoo clock, though. This is a pretty fancy one. So I had to begin with a very simple question. What is a cuckoo? I found that cuckoos play any number of symbolic roles as a European harbinger of spring, so reliable that they designed a clock around it. I found that depending on where you are in the world, the cuckoo might be a sign of good luck or bad luck, fair or foul weather, a harvest, fine or poor, imminent marriage, or financial security. Most of all, I found that our fascination with the cuckoo's reproductive habits have kept novelists, playwrights, poets, filmmakers busy for centuries. And this is the aspect of the bird's cultural history that I'll focus on in the next few minutes, and the bits of it that I'll read, which are adapted from the book. Back to real cuckoos. Pity the common cuckoo, a bird on whom humans have projected some of our most elaborate fantasies. From the utopic, otherworldly city of birds known as Cloud Cuckoo Land in Aristophanes' play The Birds, first performed more than 24 millennia ago, to Sunny, who you saw in the previous slide hawking sugary cereal, the cuckoo has long embodied moments when fantasy collapses into folly. Consider, too, the umbrage taken at the reproductive strategies of some members of the cuckoo family. Charles Darwin himself couldn't resist calling their behaviors strange and odious. Science journalist Ed Yong, who's kind of a hero of mine, went so far as to call cuckoos murderous slackers. Scottish naturalist James Hardy, writing in the late 19th century, took a refreshingly different view, calling the common cuckoo, this darling bird. But Beth Ann Roberts, author of Nightingale in Reactions Animal series, struck a more ambivalent tone upon hearing the cuckoo call in spring a couple of years ago, announcing on social media from the UK, "First cuckoo, exciting until you remember what bastards they are." More on that in a minute. The cuckoo family isn't large, but its member species are quite diverse in size, plumage, and behaviors. The order also includes the birds, some of which are depicted here. Notice the kua, the kukal, the ani, the koel, the makola, and the roadrunner. Some are long-distance migrators, some are homebodies or reluctant flyers, some are arboreal, others are ground-dwelling. Some pair bond monogamously, build dedicated nests, and share parenting duties. A few participate in cooperative breeding, sharing group nests. But of course, we're talking about the cuckoo, the common cuckoo primarily. So I just wanted to share quickly this photo that I took at the Museum of Natural History here in New York from their egg collection. And these all are like late 19th, early 20th century. Fortunately, this isn't practiced much anymore. Collections of eggs where a cuckoo egg that has been laid in a nest with another bird's eggs have been collected all together, right? So here's a cuckoo egg with 3 sedge warbler eggs, 2 with a goldcrest egg, and you can see they really vary in coloration. And this cuckoo will always lay her eggs in the sedge warbler nest because her egg looks kind of like it, right, in its coloration. And that's really typical to be very picky, make sure that there's a good match, right, which increases the chance that the cuckoo egg will be accepted and survive. Birds who are obligate brood parasites, and that's the common cuckoo, never build their own nests or raise their young. For those of us in North America, we're probably most familiar with this behavior from the more local cowbird. Brood parasites deposit their eggs in the nests of other birds, leaving them to raise the interloping hatchling in competition with or instead of their own offspring. Cuckoo hatchlings, there we go. Cuckoo hatchlings, as in this image, will readily nudge the host's eggs out of the nest. And so how do they, you can see this is a pretty big hatchling, right, compared to that little marsh warbler egg next to it, right? How did it grow so fast, right? Well, it hatches before. It's a very demanding baby, and it will be fed by a parent or parents who were prepared to feed 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 offspring. So after not very long passage of time, like this is what you get, right? This is the reed warbler, the parent, feeding the juvenile cuckoo who is still dependent on it, but who's grown to many times its own size. But gosh, that red target, that red interior of its mouth, that is a target that you just can't miss, right? Like that, really increases its chance of getting all the food. Now, we're going to talk about the cuckoo in our cultural history, right? Oh, we're going to skip these guys. In our cultural history, where cuckoos often appear in riffs on the brood parasitism, right? And in a less than straightforward linguistic move, the cuckoo's habit of laying her eggs in another bird's nest has given risen to the term cuckold. While brood parasites take the greatest advantage of the parental labor of smaller nesting birds who will raise the parasitic chick as their own, the label cuckoo, and you can see here that there's a twist, right? The label cuckoo and metaphorical uses of cuckoos in literature most often concern themselves with female infidelity and parental anxiety. Narratives in which a woman has given birth to a child whose biological father may or may not be her husband, for example. The cuckoo's masculinity is mocked by the term. He's the butt of the joke in Chaucer's Merchant's Tale. Shakespeare is just full of cuckolds and cuckoos, his sonnets and his plays. And Shakespeare's plays are also populated by men who mistakenly believe that their wives are unfaithful. In one of his many tales of thwarted desire and deception, Love's Labor's Lost, the cuckoo gets the last literal word, right, in this poem that is set to music and sung at the end of the play, right? Cuckoo, cuckoo, a word of fear, unpleasing to the married ear. That's Shakespeare, right? But modern horror just can't shake the cuckoo either. In my view, John Wyndham's novel, The Midwich Cuckoos, and the first of its many adaptations, the 1960 film Village of the Damned, might do it the very best, right? That is a chilling and chilly film. And if you like a little bit of horror, not too bloody, right? Like I totally recommend it. It's a lot of fun. In The Midwich Cuckoos and its adaptations, the residents of a fictional English village suddenly collapse, only to wake up hours later with no recollection of what has happened, right? They're the unsuspecting hosts. They are the women of the village, are the sedge warblers and gold, right, that have flown off to feed and have no idea what's happening in their nest. Now, the women of the village soon discover that they are all pregnant, and I mean all of them. Whether very postmenopausal women, women who claim to have not had sexual contact yet, all women are pregnant. Now, for some, this is a cause of significant alarm, as you can imagine, right? For others, it's a cause of great celebration, at least until they realize that there's something very strange about the pregnancies. The children are born quickly on an accelerated schedule, just as a cuckoo tends to hatch before its host's own eggs, and they mature quickly into demanding bullies. The women of the village go on about their maternal duties for the most part as though nothing were wrong. They're compelled to take care of these fast-growing and hyper-intelligent children. Meanwhile, the Midwich men gather at the pub, they distance themselves from the children, they suspect their wives of infidelity, and they plot revenge. I'm not going to tell you how it ends, because that would be a spoiler, right? But there's also Village of the Damned, much later film, and then a very, very recent television adaptation, streaming adaptation, The Midwich Cuckoos. So you can find as many Midwich Cuckoos as you like from whatever time period. More recently, even more recently, right, in a similar vein, 2019's Vivarium. In this film, did I get the slide up? No, sorry. There we go. In this film, a couple played by Jesse Eisenberg and Imogen Poots find themselves trapped in an austere housing development. They're like dropped off and abandoned by a real estate agent, only to discover that no one else lives there. And after some time of not being able to escape, they have an infant foisted upon them. And this is a mocking, screeching, voracious, and fast-growing boy whose demands they simply can't resist. They are unwitting surrogate parents who are really controlled by this mysterious child. Cuckoo, a horror film from just last year, 2024, got kind of a small release, but is, circulating for those of you who love, body horror, recasts the cuckoo trope as a kind of mad science experiment in which the antagonists are seeking to create a new species, Homo cuckoolidae. And again, there's forcible impregnation of women who happen upon this, Swiss chalet, and it's not for the faint of heart, right? This is a bloody, gory one, but if you're into that kind of thing, you can see the cuckoo really, really turned out there. But let's get back to the birds, right? And this is where I'm going to close my prepared remarks and the bits of reading shortly. But let's get back to the birds, and I want to do it here with this screenshot from the BTO, the British Trust for Ornithology's website, because this is a project that I just think is so cool. I want to share with people here, whether you came here already knowing a lot and more than me and more than everyone, right, about the common cuckoo, and they're a part of your life, or whether they're pretty new to you as they were to me. this is a website that you really, really want to visit. And a cool thing that you can do is sign up for alerts about their migrations. And you can get, so then they send you emails about a handful of birds that they have tagged, and follow very closely on their migratory routes between, these are all UK, between the UK and Central Africa every year. And you hear about where they stop. Um, you know, sometimes they take the western route through Spain, and sometimes they take the eastern route through the Balkans or Italy. And they go to some wonderful places, really, and then make it back to the UK in time to breed, and then go to winter back in Central Africa. Anyway, back to the birds. Myths and metaphors aside, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, the IUCN, lists the vast majority of cuckoo species, including the common cuckoo, as of least concern. Despite evidence that the population is declining, at least in Europe, where most of the data seems to be collected. So why are they declining? Well, one cause seems to be a migration route that is growing ever more challenging. Researchers with the BTO noted in a study undertaken in 2011 to 2014 that cuckoos flying along the western route, that one that goes through Spain, to their winter homes in Central Africa, suffered disproportionate fatalities along the way, due at least in part to drought and wildfires in Spain. Severe weather, severe climate. Another changing constraint on the cuckoo is its dependence on other birds. Songbirds, who are potential cuckoo hosts, lay usually an egg a day until 3 or 4 or 5, maybe 6 eggs are in a nest. The cuckoo, in contrast, lays only every 2 or 3 days, but she can lay 10 or 15, maybe even 20 eggs during one breeding season. Many hosts that migrate are shifting the time of their migrations in response to a warming climate. Meanwhile, the cuckoo has barely changed its routine. If the host and parasite breeding cycles fall far out of sync, the cuckoo will find fewer opportunities to place their eggs in nests where they're likely to be tolerated, and they won't match with their host. And of course, declines in host populations would leave the cuckoo with far fewer options as well. Some typical hosts are thriving, and again, in this part of the book, I was looking mostly at UK figures here, but others have declined sharply. The sedge warbler, the linnet, the greenfinch, right, are all showing declining populations. Animals like the cuckoo live in complex webs of predator and prey, parasite and host, native species, and those that we've introduced to new parts of the world. They're also subject to a not so delicate and destructive dance with the expansion of human culture. Cuckoo species that the ICUN does list as vulnerable or threatened, right, do tend to be suffering from hunting and habitat loss. But our brushes with wildlife of all kinds, common cuckoos, those more often heard than seen, seasonal migrants, take place in around the fringes of our growing urban societies. Thanks to those encounters, bird song, even one as simple as the male's 2-note song, and it is only the males that do the cuckoo, birdsong influences our musical compositions. These birds inspire our myths and our metaphors, and how we mark the passage of time. I had to close the book by asking, what will fire our imaginations once we push such creatures into further precarity? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cynthia, for sharing those pieces of your book and additional things that you shared with us. Wow, that's a lot. I'm amazed at how much you could pack into this small book, and how much it was. Well, when I was reading the book, I was like, oh my gosh, the myth stuff was just fascinating, and the way that you wove it into um, past culture, current culture, and the section on the movies. I tend to be a little bit of a buff on, and I was thinking, oh, some of these sound really great for some Halloween fun. But And then I know that you, just so you all know, when Cynthia and I spoke a little bit ago, I guess it was last month sometime, she was like, "Is it okay if I share a little bit about the crab book?" And I'm like, "Absolutely," because we all love animals, but I have to say, it now makes me want to go out and get the crab book so that I can read it more closely. Because not only can I think of it in context of what you've done with the cuckoo, but I have to admit I just love the crabs. And when you shared with us the picture, and I don't know how many of you here joining us tonight can kind of visualize this, but yes, they leave the shell and go find a bigger one. And I saw that in person, and it was so weird to see that. And the way that you just captured it this evening was like, oh my God, yes. So I'm going to have to get that book, the crab book, in addition to recommending that folks get the cuckoo book. So
Oh, well, thank you. But don't forget that there are so many other bird books here and so many other animals, right? So yeah,
yes,
that's great.
yes. Well, and again, I love the way that you weave in just so many. I mean, how many of us don't know about a cuckoo clock? And I'll bet there are those of us sitting here right now that have a cuckoo clock somewhere in our history, whether it's in our own house or whether it was, grandparents or whatever. And honestly, Cynthia, I have to admit, after I saw all of these cuckoo clocks, I'm like, yeah, I could do a cuckoo clock again because they're just so cool.
Well, amazingly, they are still made, right? But they are industrialized in a way that they originally weren't, but um, one of the things in reading about the cuckoo clocks that I found kind of interesting is that, like some of the early attempts, way many centuries ago to build a clock that had, this kind of activity, that would have a lot of moving parts and, really take advantage of, modernizing, metalworking and so on. That the bird that made sense to people, right, was have the cock crow, you know, but that was really hard, and the nightingale, no way, like way too complicated of a song, right? But the male cuckoo song, which is only two notes, as you said, and I can't hit the note. I'm pretty tone deaf, but you did it pretty nicely, Alicia. The it's two notes. It's not that hard, right? And so actually, I have an old clock, an old cuckoo clock that I remember in my childhood home, and it's pretty broken down, but which was great because then I could open it up and look at it and see how the bellows worked. And it's not really in windable shape right now, but I could reach in and just press on the levers that would be activated at the hour, and I could make the sound manually. So that was pretty fun. And it's amazing after, the clock must be almost 100 years old. Um, uh, it's cool that it still works even though it's pretty beat up.
That
Um,
is so cool. So wait a minute, is that the picture? Because she has a picture in here of I'm not gonna be able to see it very well, but the inside of a cuckoo clock on page 101, just in case you're wondering if you have the book in front of you. But is that the clock you're talking about, or was that a
yeah,
different clock that you
that's
picked
my
up?
clock.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, it was probably a grandfather's clock, my grandfather's clock, and I remember my father had it in our home, and I found it in his garage, and so I took it.
Oh, so cool.
And yeah,
So
that's
cool.
a lot.
Yeah. And so before we get too far, I have, of course, a bunch of questions for you and thoughts, but I just want to let you know that some folks have written in here, great
Mm.
presentation. Michelle tells us that she doesn't have a question, but she loved it when she saw a cuckoo in Portugal last year and she
Oh
could
yeah.
hear it. And while it took a while to locate it, how many of you have like, there's a cuckoo out there somewhere and it's like takes you forever to find it. But she says it was a thrill. So I wanted to make sure you knew that and the great
Yeah,
presentation. A
yeah,
couple
that's
folks have
fabulous.
said
I'm a
that.
little jealous. When I was working on Cuckoo, I was very happy to spend some time in the UK. In June, the trip was timed partially, well, to the academic year, but also knowing that there would be a good chance of hearing cuckoos. And I was just so thrilled that I did, a couple of times, get to hear them, but we could never see them. We were in such dense um, uh, the where trees were so dense we couldn't see them. And but people I know who've lived in the village where we were, were like, I've lived here for 30 years and I've never seen one either, but I hear them every spring, right? Um, so Michelle, you were really, really lucky. That's really cool.
Yeah,
Um,
that is really cool. So we've got a question for you. Let's see. Prof. Chris sounds like this person may know you. Thank you. I wonder about the sort of nest transgression that the cuckoo engages in. Could you say more about the ways that this kind of adoptive might point to other ways of imagining affinity across different spaces? Sorry, I have something
well,
blocking some of those
I
words, but
know I know that Professor Fuqua is fascinated by interspecies affinities, right? And there's a whole genre of this on social media, right? On TikTok and Instagram and so on, where people share videos of like, the fawn who's friends with their German Shepherd, or that kind of thing, right? Or the penguin that was rescued by somebody and goes to visit them all the time, so we I think that stuff it's so compelling for us because it crosses some kind of boundary. Fawns should be scared of German shepherds, right? And penguins are not so, we don't think of them as like, whoa, they're going to recognize human individuals and have a memory that would encourage them to act on it by having a special relationship with an individual that once, I don't know, pulled them out of a mudslick and helped them clean off or whatever. And so, it's interesting, like, JV is framing this as an adoptive practice, but so often, like, if Charles Darwin of all people has to say that a behavior is strange and odious, you have to worry that it's like really getting under people's skin, right? Because you would think you know, this is a person who was supposed to be like an objective, groundbreaking scientist, and clearly it really bothered him to think about about what the common cuckoo does to reproduce. And and some people, as I've talked to them about this and told them, what I was working on, and have said to me, that it's really scary. No wonder they make horror films that use the cuckoo as a model, because that is really creepy. That the cuckoo infant, can kill, smaller songbird, or dispose of the eggs, or whatever. And and I think, well, what is the female cuckoo doing that's so wrong anyway? She has a lot of obligations in her life. First of all, she's going to lay so many eggs that it's too many for her to take care of on her own, right? She needs daycare. Let's face it, like, she needs help. And she also has this migration that she has to do. That's not a choice. Like, she's not going to the Bahamas for fun. She's migrating instinctively. And so, again, she needs help. She doesn't have time to stay through the growing up period. So usually, we think of it more as like a kind of almost like a terroristic act that the cuckoo is inflicting on these other birds. But I think that JV is asking us to flip that around. And what if the songbird says, you know what, I can lay I can lay three clutches a year. So what if I give this one up to help this other species, right? Now, obviously, it's not conscious like that, right? I don't think that, that there's that kind of conscious thought, right? But when we think about the relationships between animal species, which are absolutely, imperative for their life cycles, we can describe what's happening, even if we are doing so in kind of fanciful and like silly ways that I've tried to do. Um, anyway, I don't know. Does that?
well, and so certainly, you bring up a very great point that we're just all trying to survive, and and birds and people survive in the ways that they can, and we think I think sometimes and you talked a little bit about cowbirds, and, we understand them as, doing similar things. Um, it is very, it's a survival tactic for sure.
Yeah,
But
and
I
it's
have
not.
an interesting question related to survival, because I was thinking about this myself as I was reading your book. Let's see, where did that question go? Oh, what does the male cuckoo contribute to the whole cycle?
Well, birds don't take very long when they mate. So basically they fertilize very quickly and then they're off, right? That's it. You know, the yeah. That I think
Yeah,
that's what you wanted to know, right?
that's his contribution. Okay.
Yeah, it's an
Yeah,
important contribution. The eggs aren't going to hatch without. Um, so yeah, that's the quick and dirty answer to that. Um,
yeah.
But
So,
something about how we worry about I'm sorry, but I get excited about this stuff.
yeah,
Alicia, what you said about we're all just trying to survive, right? And like I remember when I started work, when I was working on watching wildlife actually as my dissertation. It later became a book, and my advisor in graduate school said, "Wow, there are going to be things that I'm not going to be able to, watch with you, or I'm going to have a hard time reading as you're working on it because I can't stand it when the lion kills the gazelle or the zebra or whatever." And I was like, "Well, you just ate a hamburger at lunch, right?" Like, so it was always hard for me to understand. Everybody has to eat, right? And we are so removed from the violence that's done in the in factory farming and so on, then we don't really think of it as violence. But when you see the leopard chase down the gazelle, we frame it as violent. And I think that deserves some looking at.
yeah. And when I was growing up, my mother would always be like, "Oh, it's horrible watching like the lion catch the gazelle." She just didn't like that at all. But it's like, well, it's kind of life. And so my dad, the biology teacher, was like, the children need to see this. And then my mother was like, "Oh, we can't watch it." But I have a couple I don't want to miss here in the chat.
Oh
Thank
yeah,
you.
yeah.
Great presentation. The question is, how did the cuckoo get into the clock in the first place?
Okay. So let me see if I can find this really quick. I mean, I've briefly addressed this, I think, in saying that, that it turned out that as people experimented with sounds that they could make with very, very simple, I wish I had the clock within arm's reach, but I'd have to get up on a ladder to get it, so I won't. That experimented with very, very, it's like a little tiny whistle, it's a little bellows that, air is pushed through, and it can be built to make a sound that's pretty close, right? And that it was just, like I said before, it was just really easy, right? Like Nightingale, you're not going to do it, um, and because it's just too complicated. Now, of course, you can have a digital recording and stick it into a chip in a modern cuckoo clock and have any bird that you want, right? But in an 18th century handmade clock, these are wood and paper bellows, and I know who asked that question. I'll show it the clock the next time you come over to my house.
So yeah, so I remember you talking about that in the book, and it was someplace around 86, 87, maybe, but I can't find it quickly enough. But another question in the chat is, how is it that cuckoo has come to mean unhinged? Is it because of the song?
Well, I don't know that it doesn't seem super clear. This is an etymological trail that seemed to have a lot of uncertainty in it. Um, you know, one might think, well, the reproductive strategy is just weird, so we're going to associate a kind of uh, you know, uh, for lack of a better word, like, deviance from a social norm, right, to the cuckoo. Um, but the song appears in like some Aesop's fables and so on. Like the cuckoo has a really hard time. There's an Aesop's fable where the cuckoo and the bee really get into quite a tussle. And the bee accuses the cuckoo of being so repetitive. Your song is so repetitive, like cuckoo, cuckoo, can't you do something else, you know? And the cuckoo says to the bee, well, you know, look, you just build these hives over and over again and they all look alike. So I really don't think that you have room to talk. And the bee says, well, the bee says that, rather than try to find the passage and read it, I'll just tell you. The bee says, but my work is useful. You know, I'm producing honey, you know, and you can tell that a human wrote the story, right? Um, and because honey is useful to us. And I'm producing honey, I'm doing something useful. What do? You know, you just sing the silly song over and over again, you know. But if the cuckoo song is a territorial claim, a call, you know, letting females know that he's around and available if they need anything, then it seems pretty utilitarian to me, right? The bee might not have been being fair to our cuckoo in that fable, but but that's another one. The relentlessness of the song, like just singing it over and over and over again, like can't you change your tune? Like I believe that is another one of the sources of this because you hear it in those kinds of like the Aesop's fable that I just recounted.
I love all of the stories and the myths and the experiences that people have with different animals and different situations. And Laura Sanchez from Colombia says that there's a
Oh,
type of cuckoo, the squirrel
oh
cuckoo,
yeah.
and the communities, this bird is very important because they believe this bird is a spiritual leader that announces when something is positive or negative, or when a snake is close, and other things with its songs.
So to hold that belief, right, you have to be willing to listen to the animal, right? You have to be willing to recognize that its song is not just this, relentless or repetitive, sort of background noise, but you have to admit that the animal is saying something. And it might not intentionally be saying something to you, they might be talking to each other. We know that all kinds of animals, monkeys and so on, have big vocabularies, and that the sound that the call for there's a leopard and the call for there's a snake that we should all watch out for are different, right?
Mhm.
You to hold that belief, you have to really be able to quietly and gently be able to listen to the animal. That's great.
Yeah. And, I love that, listening to the animal. And, so many times we do listen to the birds, like the starling, the European starling that was outside my hotel window this morning. And there's a whole life going on there. And there's a whole story that that bird has that I have no clue about. And I don't know who he was singing to, but he was pretty interested. So, I'm not seeing other questions or comments necessarily in here, but I do want to ask you about the timeline of the cuckoo. So you've got
Mm.
this great timeline in here. Was that something that you just were like, oh my gosh, there's so much history here, I need to put it in a timeline? Or how did you come up
No,
with that timeline?
every book in this series has a timeline. So, the timeline of the cuckoo. And so, um, Reaction, the publisher has, there are a few things that they want for you to do. They want for you to have, for these books, to have one chapter on the natural history. So the first chapter is about, well, who's all in the cuckoo family, even though I'm going to really focus on the common cuckoo, um, and tell us a little bit about its evolution and so on. And then you're free to, run wild on its cultural history, because that's really where they're going here. Um, but they also ask, it's something that they ask of all the authors in the series to put in these timelines. So, um, uh, but they're very eclectic, right? Like they're a real hodgepodge, right? Of, first common cuckoo fossil known, to when the cuckoo clock is developed, um, you know, when the Black Forest clockmaker, you know, we're talking about like foresters who like need something to do in the off season, you know, who start making these clocks, um, uh, you know, and, you know, certain musical compositions, you know, for example, I'll pull out from there, you know, Handel's organ concerto in F major, known as the Cuckoo and the Nightingale. So that's a place where those two birds get together to sing. And, you know, so just some highlights, right? Like just to put some highlights in there. And so they're fun, but they're very, very eclectic timelines. Yeah, because they so merge things that happen in natural history with things that happen in cultural history. I want to give just one more pitch, if I can work it in a minute, for this reaction series, because the publisher, and it's spelled reaction with a K, based in London, and they publish books on a series of books on many different subjects. And for example, there's a series on food, and the food series has a book on oysters, but the animal series has a book on oysters too, and they're two very different books, right? Because animals play such different roles in different contexts, right? So the oyster is what I'm thinking of. Chicken too appears in both series. And so, you know, there are other books about landscape, there's one about, you know, philosophers, I think there's a photography series, but the food one is a kind of closely related one. And so I just wanted to say, you know, again, they're fun to check out. They have, you know, an easy to maneuver website. And in the US, the University of Chicago Press Distribution Center distributes their books. So you can get them on all of the major online retailers, or ask your local bookshop if you're interested in a particular, you know, I don't know, albatross, peacock, whatever tickles your fancy.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, Cynthia, it has been so fun having you. And just, comments are like, fabulous presentation. You got people talking about, things like, oh, cuckoos are good luck. And even though, there is that stigma of, oh, cuckoo. Um, I love that people look at them as harbors of spring and good things that can happen and warning and so forth. And so a lot of good things that we can take away from tonight for sure. And just a lot of kudos to you for a great presentation, fascinating. And your friend JV had to dash off, but says thanks, and he'll get back with you with more. So we greatly appreciate your sharing the cuckoo, and it sounds like that's not going to be the only thing you're going to share with us. So very cool. We'll look forward to that. And I do want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. We appreciate your support. We appreciate your being interested in birds. And again, our next book is The Bird Friendly City. And that's on April 24, which is again a Thursday night. And so you all, I think, know where you can register for that. And then I'm just going to put a link in the chat for more information about World Migratory Bird Day. And we hope to see you at an event someplace close or far away from you if you want to get traveling. So Cynthia, thank you again so much for joining us. This was so fun. And a real cool thing to be able to share. So if you know somebody who has a cuckoo clock, it would make a perfect gift for them for sure. Thank you again, Cynthia. And McGill, thank you so much for being our master of ceremonies and making sure that everything worked. We appreciate you being here tonight, joining us all the way from Venezuela. So thank you, McGill, and thank you again, Cynthia. And we will see you all again on another Environment for the Americas Bird Book Club. Thanks so much.